Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class this afternoon. We're going to talk about assessing website quality with Lighthouse, which is one of our browser developer tools. We're just going to see how this works and really how it makes a lot of the things that we're learning, like in our module, a lot easier, because it essentially takes a lot of the stuff that we can do by hand using those inspect element tools with, and it automates it. So it is one of my favorite browser developer tools in terms of finding out whether something is good or not. And remember that when we're talking about quality here, we're talking about essentially efficiency, but we also get a few other things here like accessibility, and it also checks for some best practices in both general development and in search engine optimization, which we'll talk about today. But before we get into that, right off the top, I would like to just hit you with a few announcements. One is that I went ahead and I deleted Module 8. And I'll tell you why. I was basically done with it. I was building it, and I was examining it, and I was looking at everything that was kind of going on. And then I basically looked at the class as a whole, saw where kind of we all were at, and there are several of us that are behind. So what I would like to do, for one, the interest of not putting people any more behind, and two, give you all kind of an extra week to basically pull together that final project, I got rid of Module 8. No Module 8. So that week that was going to be dedicated to Module 8 is now another week for you all to just kind of both get caught up and dedicate it to kind of pulling together the final project. So that is one. Two is that I went ahead and filled out all the zeros for missing work in the gradebook. This does not mean that you cannot turn it in. I'm here to work with you. Everything's going to be okay. Turn it in and that zero goes away. I don't know that it's true, but there is some wisdom that kind of says that you don't know exactly what kind of a dire situation that you're in unless you see that. So I want you all to see that. And we're right here at the time where we need to be making decisions on whether or not we're going to be completing the course. Right, the withdrawal deadline is Monday. I know I've been having trouble getting in touch with some of you. I'm going to try again. If we haven't already talked, expect me to at least try to talk to you at some point today. So there is that. But we're talking about assessing website quality with Lighthouse today. And Lighthouse is a pretty interesting tool. Makes our lives a whole lot easier. So I just kind of want to do a little overview of the product, kind of what it does. And it's completely free. Like, it's built into our browser, but we can also install an extension for it, which we'll see in just a little bit. And it really takes a lot of the stuff that we, are kind of looking at how to do manually in our module. And in the other videos that I'll kind of be posting for you, I've got another one that goes along with the one I posted last week as well. and I will be... it takes a lot of that stuff that we can do manually, and it does it automatically. And I really like it. So I think first, when we're talking about kind of assessing website quality, we need to talk about kind of what website quality is, or how we determine what level of quality a website is at. And I think we can do that by, well, we could really do that in many different ways, right? Like, the best way to probably measure the quality of your website is by getting direct feedback from your user base. Right? We want to be able to get direct feedback from our user base, and that's going to tell us, you know, how things are working for your regular user. They know if it's not fast enough, if it's not loading quickly enough, if they're having trouble finding things, if it's not accessible, it's not meeting their accessibility needs, so on and so forth. So if you can get that feedback from them, that's great. That's amazing. That's what you want. But most of the time, especially when we're working on a site that is maybe larger, we can't get that feedback. That's not possible for us to get. So we need to rely on some tools to help us. And we've seen kind of the way that we can manually do some of this using our different panels in our Inspect Element tool. You know, that's kind of what the module goes through, what a lot of the other stuff that we talk about kind of goes through. But really, Lighthouse takes this and it automates it, and it makes it a whole lot easier. And really, Lighthouse alone would be a good thing for you to utilize to, you know, like work on your work on that part of the final project for whoever out there has the assessing quality part. You know, you can run a Lighthouse report pretty quickly, and then take that data and determine suggestions from it. So what exactly is Lighthouse? Well, Lighthouse is made by Google, and it's an automated tool that's created by Google, and it is there for the purposes of assessing and improving the quality of web pages. And it has multiple different audits built in that it does that checks for specific details regarding different categories, right? And we'll see what those categories are in just a minute. So again, you know, it's taken a lot of the stuff that we've been doing manually, and it puts it into something that, you know, kind of does it for us. And so we'll look at these criteria. These are our 5 categories that we're looking at: performance, best practices, search engine optimization, accessibility, and progressive web application. And so we'll kind of get into each of these a little bit and just kind of talk about a little overview of what each of these categories are. And then when we actually get into like some demonstration, we'll look at the different standards that are under each of these categories, what it's looking for, and we'll briefly talk about like how we can fix stuff like this. Some of these probably make a lot of sense to you, like you know exactly what they are. Like we've talked about what accessibility is. We know what performance is. Best practices here is kind of vague. We'll talk more about what that is in just a little bit. You might have heard of search engine optimization. You might not have. We'll get into that a little more. And progressive web applications, what exactly those are. Which those won't be something that you encounter as much. For something to be a progressive web application, it has its own set of standards that it must adhere to. And so we'll talk about them when we get to that point. But let's talk about running Lighthouse. So we can add the Lighthouse browser extension. And that's what I like to do, right? I prefer the browser extension. If I switch windows here, this is the browser extension of Lighthouse for Chrome. As you can see, I have it installed. It says remove from Chrome here. I even went and pinned it to my taskbar. Normally I have it unpinned because I only use it when I need it. Right? If you click on this little puzzle piece, these are your extensions, and you can pin and unpin versus whatever you need. So I pinned it up here for our demonstration today. And this is our page, and it gives you a little description of what Lighthouse is, what it does, gives you some information on a quick start guide to using it, right? Like this is kind of a good thing to kind of have bookmarked, this quick start guide, just so you can go back to this for reference. And there's a little preview of something we'll be looking at in just a little bit. But I like to have it, as the extension, because if I'm on any website at all, I can use this with it, and I can just click the little Lighthouse icon, and it'll run my Lighthouse report just immediately. And as we can see here, it's available for all browsers, right? Like I have the Firefox add-on page here. It's the same Google extension. It's just running its audits in Firefox instead of in Chrome like it normally would. So we have that information here as well. Pretty good stuff. There, so we can use this as an extension, we could use it directly from the web developer tools. One of the things that the last video we looked at was how we get to those web developer tools. We'll be looking at this in a little more depth a little bit later on, but if I go to, say, clevelandcc.edu, and I examine my browser developer tools by just inspecting, we can see we have a panel here that is Lighthouse, and we can generate this Lighthouse report from here. So this is pretty good because it gives you these selections here up front instead of having to kind of manage the extension and doing these options here, right? Like if I want to change my settings here, I need to go into it's got options grayed out here. But either way, like we get these options here. We see our 5 categories here: performance, PWA, best practices, accessibility, and SEO or search engine optimization. We can choose whether we can test performance on mobile or desktop. It'll emulate desktop versus emulating mobile. Typically for all sites, I'll tell it to emulate mobile just because that's the way that the majority of our users are going to encounter our site. So, if we're getting a baseline of mobile scores, even though those mobile scores might be a little worse, that's the way that the majority of our users are going to be accessing our site, is through mobile. So we're going to want to do that. But we can click Generate Report here, and it'll run through and it'll create a report for us. You can see it do like a little fake page load here. And we'll do this on both. We'll do this in both. We'll do it in the Lighthouse tab, and then when this is done running, I'll open up another window, put clevelandcc.edu in it, and then click my Lighthouse extension button there, just so you can kind of see the difference here. It does take a while for it to happen, right? Because it's taking, there's about 10 to 20 metrics that it's examining per category area. So this can take a long time to kind of do as it's doing these things. So we're just going to give it a few minutes here to do its thing. And then we will kind of go into how we examine the results. And while this is kind of going, let me see if I can go ahead and open up another browser window. We'll open up clevelandcc.edu again. And if this doesn't crash me, we'll just go ahead and run our report here. This is another reason why I prefer the extension over the tab in your developer tools there. I like getting its own page. I like doing all this kind of stuff. And we can also see, like, you can kind of see it through the blurriness of the page. If you don't want to install something, but you do kind of want to take advantage of that sort of interface, there's a website for it. That is web.dev/measure. And that's essentially the online tool for that. So I can put clevelandcc.edu in here and run my audit. And that's going to be essentially the same thing. So that's 3 different ways to kind of run my Lighthouse audit, so that we can kind of figure out how to improve our page. But again, it does take time. It's even doing it in the cloud this time. It's still taking a while. Let's see how this is doing. This is still kind of hung up here. But this Lighthouse report is done. And so really that's kind of the most important thing. This will be the one that we kind of use to examine here. And you might notice performance is pretty bad, and we'll talk about why here in just a little bit. Right, you see one of the big things that we get here across the top, these are our scores. And we can evaluate scores similarly, right? We can run a report on any website to see the statistics, right? Like the scores that I have, the overall scores that I have here are the overall scores from Amazon. These are the Amazon.com overall scores. And you can see they're all pretty high, right? Performance is still kind of low, but then again, it's Amazon, right? We might even run this report on Amazon just so we can see where Amazon is lacking in that performance area, just so we can look at it a little bit differently. You can see accessibility is very high. That's important there, right? And that's something that we've talked about, for those of you who are in the other classes, we've talked about the importance of accessibility, especially in e-commerce, for, making sure that everybody basically can buy your stuff. Best practices covers a wide range of stuff. We'll get into that a little bit more. SEO, search engine optimization. Basically, for any large website online, search engine optimization is going to be through the roof. Right, we can see it's got a 99 score here, right? Especially when you're running a business and that business's goal is to make money, which is the goal of basically every business. It's going to be super high. That's going to be an important focus. And then progressive web app, it's not one. Amazon.com is not a progressive web app. So let's talk about each of these scores, just kind of the overview of what each of these scores represent, and then we'll go back and we will analyze them for both clevelandcc.edu and for, we'll go ahead and do the Amazon.com one as well. So our performance score is going to be based on different audits and metrics for determining lag. Right? It's basically looking at the things that are important to the speed in which our site loads. So these are things like the first paint time. When we're talking first paint time, that's essentially the first time an object renders on our page. Right? We want that to be pretty quick. We want that to be within, milliseconds. Right? And, looking at other things like key elements to render and all that kind of stuff. The more interactive a page is, the slower it will be, because it's looking for things like hover, and it's looking, has a lot of JavaScript event listeners and things of that nature. So when we're looking at an Amazon.com performance score of 71, I would almost bet that is where those points are lost to, is that that interactive, time to interactive. Just because there are so many things on the Amazon.com homepage that you can interact with that has different hover and clickability and all that kind of stuff on it. And I also know exactly where the lag issues are on the clevelandcc.edu website. And those are actually relevant to the course as well. So we will examine that in a bit. Best practices score. This is, everything from HTTPS usage to correct image aspect ratio. So like if you've resized images with CSS, did they maintain their aspect ratio? That's one of the things that this is looking for. It's looking for all kinds of different stuff. We'll break it down when we get into our demos here. The search engine optimization score, best practice to ensure your site is discoverable. There's a metric that we use for this called, let me make sure I get the acronym right, what exactly that it stands for. There's a metric that we use in search engine optimization called SERP. SERP, and this essentially stands for search engine results pages. The more of your pages that you find in the SERP and the higher ranked your sites are on the SERP, the better the search engine optimization will be. And there are some general things that we can do to improve our search engine optimization. These include things like utilizing meta tags, utilizing our title tags, which is important, right? It's not just important to make sure it's W3C compliant, which it is. It's also important to improve search engine optimization scores. Alt text, using alt text for your images, all sorts of different stuff here as well. And again, we'll look at those in a little more depth in just a bit. The accessibility score is just basically how accessible it is. For some reason, I left that text out on this slide. But like in Web 115, we talked about accessibility. It's looking at WCAG 2.0 requirements there, and it's kind of cherry picking some of those, right? Like it's not looking at every single one to give you an accessibility score, but it is looking at a lot of the important ones. And then finally, progressive web app. What are our progressive web applications? What is a progressive web application? Well, in order for something to be a progressive web application, it needs to have 5 things of its own. And most of the sites that you encounter won't be progressive web applications just because of, one of these qualifications isn't met. Right? And like really, when we look at this, like we say these are our 5 qualifications for creating for having a progressive web application. But really for our purposes, right, if we're building websites the way that we should be building websites, there's only 2 of these that are special to building a PWA. And that is to create a custom offline page and to make it installable. I mean, by default, our goal is to shoot to have a high performance website, to make sure that all of the websites that we are building are performant. Working in any browser, obviously, like most modern browsers are, standardized anyway, so that's not even as big of a deal as it once was. And the fact that it's responsive. If we're doing responsive design, we're taking a mobile-first approach to creating websites, then all of our websites should be responsive by default. Again, the only things that are special here are to create a custom offline page. Right, creating a custom offline page is really not done very often. Right, and it's not really something that we talk about in general. Right, but essentially what's happening when we're creating a custom offline page is that we're using a service worker, and essentially when our website loads while a user is online on our site, it'll kind of cache an offline version that they can use in their browser memory. And so even if they're offline, don't have internet access for whatever reason, they can access a version of the site, even if it's not exactly the same thing. And this is really, it's really done with it when it through installability anyway. Right, like it's put into the cache memory, or it's put into memory. And really, like, the best way to put it into memory in terms of a progressive web application is to put it into memory as a part of the installation. So it's not just an extra download when the user visits your site, because that's going to increase the time to first paint, or it's going to lower that performance score. But if we do it as a part of the installation and just load it into cache or load it into, browser memory as a part of that, then that takes advantage of both the last element, which is the fact that these progressive web applications are installable, and that custom offline page there. And that's kind of beyond the scope of anything that we do in the program. I don't do a whole lot of stuff with browser memory just because it takes takes more effort than we'd probably like it to, right? Like memory management's not something that we cover a lot in these, very, very introductory courses. We'd kind of have to go down a rabbit hole of our own for those. But this is something that we can do, which is pretty interesting. And we can make a page installable. Like, you might have seen pages that are installable before. Typically in Chrome now, they'll come up and they'll have a little special icon when you go to that page that is kind of like a little box with a down arrow in it or something like that. And that's a button to indicate that this page is installable. And I actually think YouTube has that. And maybe Amazon has that. Let's check. No, Amazon does not have that, but YouTube does. So let's see. Do I have a YouTube window open here? I'll tell you what, if you're watching this, you have a YouTube window open, presumably. So if you look in your browser URL bar at the top, and you look all the way to the right, especially if you're in Chrome, right before right before the little bookmark icon, you'll see what looks kind of like a little rectangle or a little computer monitor with a down arrow in it. That is the Install YouTube installable application, installable web page. So you can just click that to install it, and then you essentially have a little application that is YouTube, which is kind of weird, right? Because it is just a web page, and you can still go to youtube.com in your browser window, but you also kind of have it as its own application. It's kind of strange, but that's part of what's required to be a progressive web app. I think the only thing that YouTube doesn't have to make it a progressive web app is the custom offline page. Because if we look at YouTube, it also does not rank in its progressive web app, so I think it might fail in the custom offline page. I don't recall. But let's look at these metrics that we're examining here, and let's look at the demos that we've kind of done and see if we can pull out anything from there. If we look at, let's see, let me find the right window again here. Too many windows. So these are our Lighthouse reports. Let's see if that one from the Lighthouse tab ever finished. No, it's still warming up. Let's cancel that and try to generate it again. There we go. It looks like it's working this time. Great, and there we go. We see all the data here. I'll do it in the browser extension window, just because it's larger. And we can see, okay, so on clevelandcc.edu, performance score abysmal, and I know why. Right, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Accessibility through the roof, right, which is important because we're an educational institution. As an educational institution, you know, if you're going to accept government funding, you have to accept government regulations in terms of accessibility. Also, you know, we're just trying to be accessible for all students. So we have an exceptionally high accessibility score here. Best practices, pretty good, you know. That's a high yellow there. Like we can see right beneath this here, we see like the different score, cut scores from being red to yellow to green. We can see red 0 to 49, yellow is 50 to 89, green is 90 to 100. So the fact that we're scoring an 87 in best practices means we could probably do just a little something and get that into the green. And then SEO is pretty high. Good search engine optimization there. Now, when we start breaking it down and we start going down the page, again, this is all stuff that you can do manually in our browser developer tools. All right, like the first contentful paint here. You know, we've kind of seen how we can do this stuff manually. Like if I go to the website here and I'm in my, what is it? My sources pane. Which pane is it? Performance pane. I can go into my performance pane here and I can start to record it and I can refresh my page. And it'll do a thing. Right? And this is essentially doing that same performance stuff manually that we see in our Lighthouse here. But we can also see that this takes a long time. We can stop it if we want to, and that'll just kind of generate us a quick report regarding performance, but again, taking time. And here we can see all this sort of data in a bit of a more complicated manner, right? Like we can see right here, FCP, that's first contentful paint. FP, that's first paint. And we can kind of see where it lays out. So maybe, you know, as you get more advanced and as you start reading these things a little more, you might want to switch over here and use these just because, like, there's more data visualization and all this kind of stuff. Right? But to me, like, this is a whole lot easier. Right? Because I can see that my first contentful paint here was 2.9 seconds as it was loading the site. Time to interactive, 15.5 seconds. Speed index is 11.1 seconds, which is pretty slow. The speed index, I can never remember quite what that does, or like what that is for. I think it's just, you know, just literally speed, how fast things are. Like ideally, we want something that's like 1 second here for speed index. Like our first contentful paint should be way lower. Speed index should be way lower. Cumulative layout shift is pretty nice. And that has to do with the amount of shifting that it takes to go from, you know, when we're being responsive, to go from desktop to mobile and back, right? The amount of shifting that takes. Like you can even see here, like these are different screenshots that it took at various places. as it was loading the page. We can see these first several ones are empty, and that's the 2.9 seconds that it took to get us to that first contentful paint, which is here, where we get that background color, and then we get the modal pop up and everything else. Now here we can see a lot of the issues, and they call them opportunities, right? Opportunities. Because these aren't things that are broken, these are things that we can fix. One is that we serve images in next-gen formats. These would be things like WebM, using WebM for videos, or using SVGs for icons, things of that nature. And really, like, you know, those are smaller file sizes if we go into, if we get into that stuff, right? So, like, you know, when we look at the clevelandcc.edu website, we've got this large MP4 video in the background. If we were to take and we were to convert that to a WebM, which is a more modern video format for the web, that's going to compress that down a lot. So it's going to be optimized, basically. While still looking pretty good. Defer off-screen images. Basically anything that doesn't load in that view, it's saying to kind of take it and load it last. So you're not waiting to load, you know, you're not waiting for these images that you can't see. And so again, that's probably a little something that's outside kind of the scope of what we would be doing, because we'd be doing, like, you know, we'd put those in a, like, if we were working on that, we'd put those in a promise, and we'd do a little bit of async and await there to kind of make sure that they wait until everything else is loaded, and then we can load any images that are off screen at that particular time. That's not a huge impact there on our overall performance, because it says it'll save us, you know, 2.4 seconds. Although that is, you know, that could be the difference between our, you know, red and yellow, or our red and green even, to be able to improve that. But if we go down here and we expand this, we actually see it actually gives us some suggestions. This is why I say using this would make your lab assignment for your group lab at the end really, really easy. Because not only does it tell you what the issues are, but it gives you some opportunities. Right? It even tells us, like, oh, since this is a WordPress site, you can install a lazy load WordPress plugin that'll do this for you. Pretty cool. Now, I don't know that I would install a WordPress. I don't know that installing a plugin is really the best way to approach performance issues, but neither here nor there. Eliminating render blocking resources. There are resources blocking the first paint. Gives you some information here about what you can do to inline critical assets here. And it also kind of gives you the URLs of the things that are kind of blocking stuff. Here's the big one. Reduce unused JavaScript. Like, that is one that could be done incredibly easily. And when I expand this, you'll see why. Or actually, maybe you won't, because these are different. Here's one of the things that we were looking for. Reducing the unused CSS. And it has well, you know what? It's changed a little bit. I didn't even think about that, because the old website used to be Bootstrap. The website that was before this one now, the one that was before the one that looks like this, was based entirely on Bootstrap. So we would get higher numbers when we were doing this. or we'd get lower numbers rather. Lower is bad. When I say higher numbers, I was talking about higher numbers in like time. We'd get higher numbers because it would be trying to load the entirety of Bootstrap, even though it wasn't using all of Bootstrap. It might only be using a handful of classes from Bootstrap. And so it was trying to load all of Bootstrap when it was only using a little bit of it. And that's where we saw a lot of the extended time on the old page. Now it looks like it's a bunch of image loading here that's probably causing the issues. Right, image loading. All this is image related. Optimizing images. And we see other suggestions here. And these are all of our audits as well. Right? These are all of our issues. And so you can kind of go through and you can read all of these. That's a big one. Avoid enormous network payloads. An 8K network payload. What all are we downloading there that is that? Let's see. The Font Awesome JavaScript framework. The Ocelot bot, which is the this bad boy. That's the big one. That video. But let's just see. I'm just interested now. I'm going to take it. I'm going to save this. I just want to see how small that would be if we converted that to WebM. Convert. I'm just going to grab a little online conversion site here. Grab my file. Let's see, this is drone footage.mp4. And we'll let it convert. While it's converting over here in my other browser window, we'll go through some more of this report. Reducing JavaScript execution time, like all the things that you would expect, and you even get to see all the past audits here. Properly size images. This is something that I preach a lot, right? Like if you resize images, the less you're able to or the less you have to resize images with code versus resizing images beforehand. Right, like we see that we can save a little bit out of this, but not a big deal. Minifying the JavaScript. The JavaScript is minified. Efficiently encoding the images. Enable text compression. Pre-connections. Server response time was pretty good. Again, even in here, like we can kind of go in here and we can see maybe some suggestions or maybe some things that we want to avoid, or just kind of get some more information on it. Right, so that's pretty good. We can see we had these. Let's count them here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. These 18 things versus these 20 things. And these are differently weighted, right? Like some of these are way more important that we have here. In our audits. And our biggest thing are these, but our biggest thing that impacts our score, because this other stuff doesn't really impact our score. They kind of support these big metrics. These 6 metrics right here are what influences our score. And so we can actually see the way the performance score is calculated. If we click here, it gives us some more information about the weighting for all this different stuff. Right, the first contentful paint, the largest contentful paint is 25%. Total blocking time is 30%. So if we look at our report viewer, the largest contentful paint here was 6.3 seconds, which is a long time in internet world. And let's see, that's the total blocking time, 600 milliseconds. Not too bad, right? Not too bad. Let's see. Let's check on that video conversion. See if that's happened yet. And it has. And this might not actually be the best example from the looks of it, because it doesn't look like it changed it much. So we'll just kind of let that go. Let's see here. We can look at all of our other stuff. Accessibility here. Background and foreground colors do not have a sufficient contrast ratio. Let's talk about why that is. That's here. That's here, and that is here. Right? Which is something that I actually need to tell the web dev about, because I've known about this issue for a little while now. Because when you're using a background image or a background image video here, your accessibility report generates as if that wasn't there. So, you know, if we took the video out here, it would be a white background with white text on top of it, so your contrast would be non-existent. If we took this image out here, it would be white text on a white background. So this just always kind of leads us to saying we need to set a background color even if we have an image present. Let's see here. What else? But that's the only issue there, right? Like if we fixed that, in all the places where we need to fix it, this would be a perfectly accessible site based on the metrics here. Best practices. Ensure CSP is effective against cross-site scripting attacks. Maybe we shouldn't look at that too closely. And really, they do have a content security policy for cores. But it looks like they're missing a few things there that could make that better. Registers an unload listener. That's weird. Look, that looks like something that might be in jQuery. Serves images with low resolution. That's just the logo. That's fine. Although that should probably be an SVG instead. Missing source maps for large first-party JavaScript. Not a huge deal. Right, so these are some things that could be fixed pretty easily. And we can see all the ones that we passed here. Uses HTTPS. Links to cross-origin destinations are safe. Avoids requesting geolocation. Has the HTML doc type. And all that sort of fun stuff. There's SEO. Links do not have descriptive text. That's the only thing in the SEO that it's really found that's an issue. Shows you there where to fix that. Right, so it looks like somewhere where we have a link to the COVID-19 information doesn't have a descriptive link to it. Maybe it's this. This is kind of hard to tell because that's just the destination, not the link itself. Oh, it's that one. It's that one that's just called more information. So we'd want that to say like more COVID-19 information here to make that descriptive. So that would actually that would take our SEO score all the way up. We'd also look at the core web vitals here as another means for that. But pretty good SEO score. And here it tells us what we're missing. No service workers. We need those service workers to create an installable page so it doesn't register a service worker. Or that's for the service worker is the other thing, not the installable one. It's the offline page. We need a service worker for an offline page. So there's no custom offline page. That's what we see for a lot of stuff here. Doesn't have a valid Apple Touch icon if you install it on iOS. Doesn't have a maskable icon. So there's no icon for installing on a touchscreen device. And then it's not installable at all. So it's not but that's fine because it's not a progressive web app. So this doesn't really matter, right? But there's where we can kind of see that. Let's go ahead and run that report on Amazon.com, right? Because that was the thing that we were loading there. And we can go ahead and click the Generate Report button there. It'll take a few seconds, but it'll generate our report. Let's just give it a second. Give it a second to do its job. It's going to take a little, the bigger your site is, the longer it'll take. So like when you're doing your final project site, those should be crazy fast. So there's that. And this actually got a little slightly lower performance score than what we saw on my slide presentation earlier, but everything else is basically the same. It looks like it might have, and that might be my internet there. Because I think I think the time to interactive might be a bit slower this time than it was before. Or maybe the largest contentful paint might be a bit slower. Well, we can see all these metrics here. We can see they have a lot of similar issues in their opportunities areas. Accessibility is higher. Best practices, looks like similar issues, right? Serves images with low resolution, registers an unload listener, all the same sort of stuff. SEO, super high. And then why it's not a progressive web application here. And then we can see, like, these were the settings that it put on the site when it tested it, right? So it's emulating a Moto G4, which, that's a Google phone, so that's what it's going to emulate. No network throttling, no CPU throttling. And it's just going to use a standard user agent kind of host there to give you that information. So we can use this. We can use all of their suggestions. We can use all the information that's provided by this one application to generate a report and give ourselves some things that we could do to help improve things. So that's basically all that I have for you today, and we're approaching our hour anyway, so I think that's good enough. We'll stop here. And I'll hang out in the chat for just a couple minutes just in case anybody who's watching with me live has any questions. If you're watching this later and you have questions, please let me know. But as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.